1. Tully. "Custody goes to Devin McKay?" Franklin Scott boomed. "Of my granddaughter? You can't be serious!" I clenched my jaw and held my tongue. His reaction was no surprise, as Katie's parents and sole surviving family members, Pastor and Mrs. Scott, might have seemed like the obvious choice to get custody of her daughter. Obvious to anyone who hadn't been close to Katie, that was. The founding partner at my firm frowned at me from across the large conference table. "Tully, do you know this Mr. McKay?" I opened my mouth to respond, but quickly shut it. The answer to that question was complicated. I didn't know him in the way that one knew a longtime friend or coworker. While I'd heard a little about him from Katie, I'd never gotten to know him personally outside of having spent a few hours with him once at a party at Katie's house. Having said that, I did happen to know what his face looked like when he tried to keep himself from coming, what his hot mouth felt like wrapped around my most intimate body part, the way his face had turned gently against mine as he'd surreptitiously inhaled the scent of me before leaving. I blinked and focused back on my boss. Oris Dunleavy's thick, chalk-white hair was always perfectly formed into a slight swoop to one side, regardless of how frustrated he was. Monogrammed cuffs peeked out from his $1,000 suit jacket as he studied me with his arms crossed and one eyebrow raised. "No, sir," I said on an unsteady exhale. "I mean, not really. I've heard of him, of course. I did prepare the will." The pastor clenched his fists on the tabletop while Katie's mom continued to cry and flutter an honest-to-God old-fashioned hanky near her face. "Someone needs to explain to me how this happened," he demanded. Oris nodded but stayed focused on me. "Tully, I'm unsure what you're asking." "Exactly," I said carefully. While I was considered the golden boy of Dunleavy, Pace, and Trumbull, no one in this firm was safe from the scales of justice around here, and by justice, I meant money. As the founders of the Church of Heavenly Victory, Franklin and Paula Scott were richer than God, and they'd moved all of their legal business to the firm as soon as Oris had hired Katie out of Duke Law. Keeping the Scotts happy was the key to keeping my bosses happy. But I'd been Katie's friend as well as her personal attorney, and I wasn't about to let her down, especially when she was no longer here to stand up for herself or her daughter. "I'm asking you to tell me why Miss Scott named this Devin McKay as the legal guardian of her child," my boss clarified. At the mention of Lely, Mrs. Scott sobbed louder, which only made the pastor's face turn redder. I cleared my throat and prepared for the explosion. "He's her biological father." Oris's eyes only widened a little, but everyone else in the room, including Katie's parents, another managing partner, 2 associates, a junior associate, and 2 assistants, all seemed to lose their collective minds. "Impossible!" Pastor Scott barked. "Catherine, how could you?" Mrs. Scott sobbed. The managing partner turned to the junior associate and spoke in a low voice. "Get us everything you can on McKay." I concentrated on breathing and reminded myself to stay calm and professional. While I understood and had expected the panic, I also trusted my good friend. Katie adored her daughter and would have never named Dev McKay Lily's guardian if she hadn't trusted him with the girl's future, and it wasn't like the man wouldn't be able to afford to hire help. Not once he realized Lily's guardian would also be the trustee of the fortune her mother had left her. Mrs. Scott seemed to get control of herself for a moment. Wait, isn't that McKay, the boy who used to work on Daddy's ranch?" Her mention of Dev's past brought back memories of the night we'd met, memories of muscled shoulders and biceps, calloused hands, and late-day stubble. I could see the man as a ranch hand, no doubt about it. "He can't have a pot to piss in," Pastor Scott said, outraged. "He mucked stalls for my father-in-law."